Get ready to jump. Today we're going to talk about time jumps and how to use them to manage your story's pacing. By the way, my name is McNulty. I'm the author of Bad Parts, also the author of Entry Wounds, and welcome to my writing channel. My subscribers have been asking me to do a video on time jumps, so I thought we'd talk about that today. We'll define what they are, we'll discuss how they work, and finally I'll give you some advanced tips for using them. I'll also be talking about Indiana Jones today, so if you're not familiar with those movies, consider this your spoiler warning. But let's start off by answering the question, what is a time jump? And very simply, it's a pacing technique that enables the story to skip ahead in time. You skip the mundane, boring, repetitive, or irrelevant parts of a story. You skip the filler. And what you're doing, you're carrying the audience from one meaningful scene to another by using these time jumps. And just to be clear, time jumps have nothing to do with time travel. They're simply a technique that can be used in any type of story. Now, time jumps come in small and large sizes. When we're talking about a small time jump, this is when you jump seconds, minutes, hours, or days ahead. And typically these types of jumps aren't noticeable. Audiences just take them in stride, the story moves along. Now with larger time jumps, you might jump days, weeks, months, years, decades ahead, and typically these are going to be more noticeable. And when you pull them off, you need to get your audience back on board. You need to show how the characters and the world have changed over these larger spans of time. And you probably noticed that I use days as an example of both a small and a large time jump, and that's because depending on the scope of your story, a day may be a significant chunk of time, or it may be something more minor. Alright, now let's talk about how time jumps work. And the thing is, stories don't have to occur in real time. So when an important moment or scene concludes, you can jump ahead to the next important moment or scene. And this can eliminate filler and it could boost your story's pacing. Here's a small example from Raiders of the Lost Ark. During the opening sequence, Indy finds the entrance to the temple that he's been looking for. And before he enters, he fills a bag with sand and then he grabs a torch from his companion's backpack. Then we jump ahead in time a minute and we see Indy inside the temple with a lit torch. This is a small, subtle time jump, but it saves us from having to watch him light the torch, which really wouldn't have any impact on the characters or the plot. It's not something we need, so we just jump ahead, we skip over it. Now here's an example of a larger time jump. After Indy grabs the golden idol and he escapes the temple, he gets the idol taken away from him and he has to run for his life. He eventually boards a plane and he flies out of Peru and into the sunset. Then we time jump ahead several days. And we know that several days have passed because we're in a new location, it's a sunny day, and Indy is dressed for his day job as a college professor. And remember this, location, time of day, your character's appearance, and what they're doing, those are great ways to signal that time has passed. The time jump here saves us from watching unnecessary events like Indy's flight home and how he returns to his daily life. And it's also worth noting that we pick things up at the end of his lecture, which is important because audiences aren't here to learn about the Neolithic age. They're here to watch an action movie. And once class ends, that's when the story starts rolling again. Alright, I'll give you one more example. This is an extra large time jump that spans decades, and it comes near the beginning of the third Indiana Jones movie, The Last Crusade. If you remember, this movie opens up in 1912 with young Indy stealing a valuable artifact from some grave robbers who eventually steal it back from him. Then we time jump ahead to 1938 and see Indy on a ship in the middle of a storm. He's trying to recover the artifact once again as an adult, and since this is such a significant time jump, we're shown the date on the screen. And that's something to remember. When time jumps span years, decades, or centuries, you may want to clue in the audience. You can show the date on the screen, or if you're writing a book, you can start your next chapter or section by saying 3 months later, or 20 years later, or whatever it is. Alright, now I want to give you 5 practical tips for using time jumps. 5 tips that'll help boost the pacing in your story. First tip is to start your scenes as late as possible and end your scenes as early as possible. In that example I gave you from The Last Crusade, we have a scene that opens up with adult Indy getting punched in the face while trying to obtain the artifact. This scene starts late. It starts right in the middle of the action. We don't see how he gets on the ship or anything like that because that stuff doesn't matter. What's important is him getting the artifact. That's the heart of the scene. And once he recovers it, the scene ends shortly afterwards with the ship exploding and Indy clinging to a life preserver. Tip number 2, prepare your audience before a time jump. This means that you want to signal that time will pass. You want to hint that characters plan on doing something, or they plan on going somewhere in the future. In Raiders, when Indy flies away from Peru, we know that he failed to secure the idol, but he managed to escape with his life. And as his plane is getting smaller and smaller on the horizon, the scene's energy drains out, and this whole scenario signals that he'll be heading to safety, that he'll be regrouping, and that's exactly what happens in the next scene when he talks to Marcus. He talks about how he could possibly get the idol back. Tip number 3, after a time jump, reorient your audience. And I already mentioned this with the classroom example. When you're reorienting, you want to establish a new location. You want to establish the time of day, what your character is doing, what they're wearing, and so on and so on. Tip number 4, get creative with your time jumps. Use different images or story elements to show that time has passed. In the Last Crusade example, the scene with young Indy ends with him receiving his iconic hat. Then we time jump and we see the hat on a much older Indy. Now the hat hasn't changed, but the guy underneath it has aged 2 decades, and that signals a time jump. And tip number 5, use time jumps to create a sense of mystery or tension. And sometimes after a jump, the audience is disoriented at first, and that can be a good thing. A skilled writer can use time jumps to manipulate the audience into becoming curious or fearful. For example, toward the end of Raiders, Indy and his sidekick Marion escape the Nazis and board a ship, hoping to take the Ark to safety. Then there's a love scene between Indy and Marion that ends with him falling asleep from exhaustion. The next time we see the characters, Marion wakes up to see Indy loading his gun. It's an abrupt moment, and the audience ends up feeling disoriented just like she does. Soon we learn that the ship's engines have stopped, and this raises some questions that get us worried for the characters. And the time jump here does a great job of not just moving the story from nighttime to morning, but it also creates tension, it raises questions, and it gets us wondering about what will happen next. So I hope this helps. Question of the day, what is the most memorable time jump you've come across in a story? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of either one of my books. Bad Parts is great if you like small town horror. It's about people trading away their sick and injured body parts in order to get healthy again. And then Entry Wounds is great if you like thrillers. It's about a guy who picks up a haunted gun and he cannot put it down until he kills 6 people with it. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe. And as always, remember to keep on writing.